Good evening, good afternoon, depends on where you are watching this from. I'm going to be your host like every Saturday, our rendezvous here on Friends of the Congo on YouTube, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on X. We are live for another episode of Congo Unfiltered. So welcome. And today, uh, we are going to talk about the Congo because in just a few days we saw essentially several things happen at once, I will say. um and we had the we had the Washington Accord between the United States and the DRC, that the U.S. strategic mineral deal, that essentially moved from announcement to actual structure. We saw things being put in place. And then the US government unveiled a new investment framework tied directly to critical minerals. And as for the first time, as a matter of fact, they had Washington, D.C., Trump administration hosted a ministerial summit that they called Critical Minerals Ministerial, on obviously on the critical minerals. And we also had of Congress that were publicly pressing to condemn the M23 and Rwanda. There was also announcement of like few sanctions, and at the same time, Congolese political actors were present in Washington. That includes President Tshisekedi himself, Martin Fayulu, the rightful winner of the 2018 elections. He's also in Washington, D.C. as we speak. And other members of opposition, I think it was also interesting to see Azarias Ruberwa. That was one of the leaders of another Rwanda's back militia at the time, at least, RCD. Azarias Ruberwa was also in Washington, D.C. So when all of these happen simultaneously, it is not a coincidence. It is definitely an alignment. So tonight we're gonna ask one central question. So if whether or not this is a partnership, right? And Congolese, um, uh, yes, Dieu bénit le patriote. Robert Roy was also there, and so the question that we're gonna be asking today this evening is this partnership really about Congolese sovereignty, or is it about securing strategic minerals for external powers? And I know that we have been for weeks, for months, speaking about that, but this is very important. This is very critical for the Congolese people, but also for the way global economy or the geopolitics is being shaped. So, but before I offer even my own analysis on that, I really want to ground this conversation in expertise, and I'm bringing someone that is not new to the show. It came, I think it was around General Council the first time that we had the pleasure to host him, and we are hosting him again. We're bringing him back again because for us, Friends of the Congo, on Congo Unfiltered, clarity here matters more than speculation, more than noise. So I'm joined tonight by Frédéric Mousseau, is the policy director of the Oakland Institute. So I'm gonna bring him on stage whenever he's there. So whenever he shows up, I will make sure to bring him on stage. So the Oakland Institute has really documented land grabs and also the extensive the extensive I would say reports to which extent this Washington Accord has somehow many flaws. So um, so there was also the extractive agreement there and the power asymmetries across Africa and the global South. So let me bring Frederic if that will work. Frederic, can you hear me? Frederic, can you hear us?
Yeah, hello, Gaëtan. Sorry, my connection is pretty bad, and I have a hard time hearing you. But hopefully it can work and you can hear me.
That's fine. We can hear you, so it's going to be a few seconds delay, but that's okay. I'm glad to have you back. So thanks again for coming back. So how are you?
Thank you for having me.
Frédéric, from your perspective, what actually changed this week? I know many people heard press releases and other heard of the word partnership, but really, when you look at this agreement structurally, and we're talking about the U.S. strategic agreement, that is, I guess, a ramification of the Washington Accord that you and I discussed last time. It was in August. So, what is really new, and what feels like familiar extractive logic under this new name?
Right. So, yes, well, the US has just realized that it is highly dependent on China for its supply of critical minerals, especially as we know in the case of Congo, which is highly reliant on a Chinese corporation. So, US corporations and the military industrial complex considers this very problematic. So what they did this week was to bring 55 countries, including DRC, together to set some pathway for securing these critical minerals for the US. What's interesting is among these 55 countries, only two, Ukraine and DRC, uh, also see the US involvement in some kind of peace talks or peacemaking, which makes it quite unique because it's not the case for most of the countries. And what is very remarkable is that Rwanda is not there, as you might have noticed. But it might be just a matter of optics for the US, and I can explain that if you like, as
Yes,
it's
please
not
go ahead.
necessarily
Yeah,
that everything has changed
yeah.
for Yeah, well, thing is, something very interesting and that I maybe got a bit unnoticed recently was that the U.S. has been investing in recent years quite heavily in Rwanda for mining and refinery, in particular building the refinery capacity of Rwanda. And DFC, the Development Finance Corporation of the US, has put 105 million into a company which is called TechMet, which is a holding company of Trinity Metals, which is the largest mining corporation in Rwanda. And all this is about refining coltan and tungsten.
I think we lost Frédéric Mousseau, and he was trying to explain essentially why, well, the involvement, to which extent Rwanda was involved, and he's back. Let me see. Yes.
So
Hey, we lost you. Yeah,
yeah,
keep going.
so
Yeah.
as I was saying, the DFC has been financing all this 105 million into this TechMed and for this processing and refinery. And uh, in October 2025, just a few months ago, there was a first shipment of tungsten from Rwanda to the US going through this company. And what is very, very interesting is, and odd actually, is that in the list of DFC investment that was published 3 days ago in the fact sheet of the Secretary of State, this investment did not appear. And it's like it suggests that the US is playing some kind of double game because it is invested in Rwanda, it is supporting Rwanda for mining and refinery, and we know that most of the refinery is refining minerals which are coming from Eastern DRC. But at the moment, is not publicizing it, and in this ministerial summit, it was just absent from all the documentation, even if it is there. And I can suggest that our listeners check out our last blog, which is called will Paul Kagame face a major moment, which gives a lot all kind of details and references about this issue and brings these facts about Trinity Metals and U.S. investment in Rwanda, which unfortunately are still very unnoticed.
Yes, and thank you for that. But I have a question because you mentioned Ukraine before, and last week, and I apologize for our audience, I wasn't feeling well, so we can do the live. And I was actually gonna dive into kind of like a, trying to come through the accord and see, even because we know that the Congolese, the civil society in the Congo, the Congolese citizens are arguing, are challenging the Washington court to the Supreme Court. And we actually had a live, a space on X. It was an audio and not video, where we talked to the spokesperson. He was able to give his point of view, or what is the point of view of the collective. But mentioning Ukraine, right, and then the Congo, um, I don't think that there is, or maybe I'm wrong, that there is a joint commission when it comes to the accord signed with Ukraine, right, where they're actually going to um, manage the resources, because also the Ukrainian president was offering minerals in exchange of peace. So in terms of this Washington Accord, what do you see as the difference between the Ukraine the accord with critical minerals in Ukraine versus the accord with critical minerals in the Congo? Where do you see imbalance?
Well, the thing is, this joint management mechanism and this uh, Congo DRC giving away its sovereignty over the management of its resources is pretty unique. Even Ukraine hasn't done that. Actually, if I've been doing some research about it, and as far as I know, the only comparable example is what happened to Iraq after the U.S. invasion in the 2000s, where there was some kind of framework where the U.S. and Iraqis were managing, so-called managing, the whole resources of the country, because the U.S. was just taking away everything. For Ukraine, it is in negotiation, but the the loss of sovereignty that DRC has accepted on this one seemed to me pretty unique, and I was quite happy to see just on the January 21st that Congolese lawyers and human rights defenders have brought a case to the Constitutional Court specifically about that, saying like, how come we have such a deal without Parliament approval, without referendum, where we give away our sovereignty in this international treaty, and we are not supposed to, according to our constitution. So I think this case brought to the Constitutional Court is highly relevant and legitimate, what given the contents of this deal, which gives away to the U.S. a whole bunch of power for the management of Congolese resources.
Yes, thank you for that. And people were asking who Frédéric Mousseau is. He is, again, the policy director at Oakland Institute. So, and you're French national, and you are the policy director of Oakland Institute, based in California. So I know you mentioned at the beginning China, that the U.S. is really trying to counter China into that. But when I was reading through the document, we did this exercise online with the audience as well a few weeks ago, when that came out, or when that was published. It was maybe the second week of December, when we had an episode specifically on that. That the agreement is prioritizing um, American, I would say, yes, American companies, right? So American entities and organizations and companies and stuff. So even it seems like even the European Union will be left out. So in terms of concern, my next question was, what are the concerns that you see when you read the architecture of the deal, and do you think that the EU would also be impacted by how exclusive the Washington Accord or the US DRC strategic deals made it. Do you see any uh, concerns other than what you already mentioned, particularly in the case of the EU? And I know that China has already put aside, but what about the EU?
We didn't really look into the EU. What's I guess what can be interesting around the EU is that their investments and deals are stronger safeguards than those of the US. We know, though you listen to Trump and his staff, uh, they don't really bother about anything. Their strategic goal is to secure the supply of minerals, whatever it takes. And I was listening to some of the speeches in the ministerials, and it was quite striking to see that environment or people really didn't matter, and actually they don't matter anywhere in the agreement and the deals that were signed between DRC and the US. It's really all about securing minerals, while the EU has some more safeguards around the like corporate responsibility and this kind of thing. So the the deal is also, and the strategic agreement is also quite unusual in the way that it is tied to a peace deal, and the peace deal itself doesn't bring anything about justice, about accountability for those who have been involved in the conflict. It's all tied to these mineral deals, and the people of Congo are really absent. There's also very little about what will happen to the revenues. What kind of revenues are coming to the Congolese? What kind of um, safeguards are put in place, not just for the environment, but also in terms of tax evasion to be prevented, because we know, and there's a long history, including for US companies in DRC, of tax evasion. So there's a whole there's a whole block that is absent from the deal, which is the interest of the Congolese people. There's a lot about the interest of US investors and their allies, but
We losing Frédéric Mousseau again. Apologize, everyone. I think there was a question online. Mary Hayden, and let me see if my Frédéric Mousseau is back.
uh,
Let me see if I can add him. Hey, can you hear us?
I'm so sorry to have
You
this bad
listen.
connection. It's
This is fine. This is fine. We're having a good conversation. There was a question, real quick, if people were going to see this. It's going to be posted online on YouTube, so y'all can just go and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So I'm gonna let you continue. Let you go on.
Yeah, well, that was about the EU. It was, I think, both the EU and the US are very, very interested in, like China, in what is in DRC, and this is certainly actually a big opportunity for the country to realize that the whole world wants what is underground in DRC, and signing a deal that gives away this sovereignty and gives so much to one bidder is in a way problematic, and not necessarily the best deal for DRC. And I understand this is happening because there's a peace deal linked to it, and the president signed the deal thinking, oh, the US is going to help me with this conflict with Rwanda and the aggression. And I know I listen to many Congolese who are thinking the same, like, oh, now we have the US on our side. But as I said earlier, uh, I, I'm very concerned that the US may be playing a double game around that with, at the moment, still no decisive action towards Paul Kagame and Rwanda. And we heard in the recent days about sanctions. But so far, what we have seen is over the past 30 years, there's been no sanction at all, even if what Rwanda has been doing in the several wars of aggression has been very well documented by the UN and others. So the US has done nothing in terms of sanctions. Even worse, they have several US presidents have waived the sanctions that they were supposed to put on the country in terms of military support and economic support. And this happened several times over the years in violation to the US own laws. And it's only in February 2025 that finally sanctions were issued on James Kabarebe, who was the Rwanda Minister of State for Regional Integration, but also, as we know, a key coordinator for M23. And it's the first time they're sanctioned, and it's just sanctioned against one individual. So I don't know what's going to happen in the coming days or weeks, if there are going to be more sanctions against individuals like this. But it is very weak for the US towards Rwanda to just put the name of some individuals like this. Uh, we still don't have one down broader economic sanction. We still have support, economic support to the country. The US hasn't put Rwanda on the list of state sponsors of terrorism, which is a possibility. The US could do that, and this is something maybe DRC could bring to Washington in the discussion. So there are a lot of concerns, and there's this big concern I have about this double game. And once again, this is very short, but read our publication on our website, oaklandinstitute.org, and see especially this last blog, why will Kagame face a Maduro moment, which I don't think is going to happen given the strong US investment in Rwanda, and given the support also of countries such as Israel, who are very, very involved in Rwanda and very influential on the US government still today. So let's see what happens. But I have big doubts there.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you're actually talking about sanctions, because I did post on my personal page, X page, regarding sanctions, because we know that sanctions are economic tools that, let's be frank, have been abused by superpower, whether particularly the United States, right? Like when you are this global economy that is pumping dollars to countries like Congo, for example, is one, if not the country that uses a dollar even more than the local currency. And when you have countries like Rwanda, who's probably like what 45% of his budget, 45 to 50% of his budget comes from foreign aid, and that has been the case for decades now. So when you have economies that essentially are living or existing thanks to foreign countries, that gives them leverage to apply sanctions, and even abusively, like we have seen in Cuba, in Venezuela, in other countries. But something that I really wanted to say, to just so that it's on the record, is that um, for the case of the Congo, me personally, and that's just me speaking, when we talk about US sanctions, I always refer that with according to the laws that are on the books. And the Leahy law, for example, that talks about sanctioning or withdrawing aids to countries that are involving grave human rights violation, human right abuse. And that's the conversation that many folks, US citizens, have been trying to have with Israel, that Israel is involved in killing and journalists and civilians. Can and should the U.S. withdraw its aid under that law? And that was the Senator, I will still call her Senator Turner's, Turner's talking about that, and other congressmen, women speaking about that. But the same thing also applied to Rwanda, that openly admitted of supporting the M23, right? And then we know, because that has been documented, that the M23 is involved in also serious human rights violation, enrolling child soldiers, of also killing civilians. And they literally bombed, the drones bombed recently, uh, an airport, civilian airport. So to me, with that, it's very interesting, because that brings the question. So when you have people that openly, and you talked about, and talking about the enrollment of children, last year when they published, I think it was last year, when they published the list of countries that are involved in that are essentially violating the Child Soldier Prevention Act, because they are somehow in enrolling children in the army and giving them weapons. Rwanda and Congo were not mentioned. And a couple years ago, it was the very first time that Rwanda was mentioned in a decade. And that led to the US not necessarily sanctioning like directly or entirely Rwanda, but at least to review, right? To review that, and trying to make sure that, okay, can we then restrict the aids, the military aids in that regard? But then, because of the Washington Accord, they decided they were not going to include both the Congo and Rwanda, because they just don't want to sanction. And that's to bring back the conversation that you had. And there was also the Public Law 109456, Section 105, that even Friends of the Congo, we did an entire documentary in 2013 around that. So to me, sanction is really tricky. It also, from the U.S. standpoint, is the sovereignty. It's the dollars. They want to use whatever tools that they have. Um, but I personally think that the sanction in that context, when there's already laws in the books, can and should the U.S. apply or implement its own law to sanction countries that are violating human rights violation? Yeah, like why not? But I thought it's a really good conversation to have, in like how sanctions are even being used or abused, right? So I'm not sure, what's your perspective on sanction particularly?
Yeah, the thing is, especially with this current administration, human rights is clearly not a concern. And what's what's really particular about this context is that the U.S. has been investing in Rwanda for over 30 years to make it a business and refinery hub, and it has been. So many observers think it has been a plan all the way, and that's certainly why several U.S. presidents have waived their own sanction system over Rwanda over the years. And so it's create a situation where the U.S. I don't see how the U.S. can really change course now that he has invested so much in Rwanda and is still invested in Rwanda, and sees this country as, the clean, good business hub where we have good technologies and infrastructures and everything, cheap, low taxes on exports. So the US see these are, when I say the US, it's US corporations and financial interests who see this as a perfect piece in the plan to export Eastern DRC minerals. So I don't see any interest from the US to really go stronger in terms of sanctions, because they have invested so much and they rely so much on Rwanda today. And as as recently as October, there were these first exports of tungsten processed in Rwanda to the US, and the same company is doing the coltan processed, uh, taken from Eastern DRC and exported to the US. So that's the plan. And unfortunately, with Trump, we can't expect much interest in moving on sanctions, and I'm afraid the U.S. Congress may have some voices, and we have seen some people speaking out in this past few days, but there would be a need for so much more pressure and mobilization in Congress that unfortunately I don't think it is. I don't think the strength is there at the moment to go and put this kind of pressure on Trump and on the U.S. corporations and mining interests.
Right. And I think to bring it back to the economic part of it, portion of it, and I remember learning that in school, Henry Morton Stanley, who was a journalist, and I think he was the one who said that without railroads, the Congo is not even worth a penny, and he said that, and meaning that it was obviously seeing again Congo as a commodity is like not even seeing the people, but like how the West, how the world can get the minerals from the Congo. Ironically, right now with immigrations, it's so much easier now to ship minerals from the Congo than to actually have Congolese immigrants in the Congo, which is really a different debate, different conversation to have in different settings. But in terms of infrastructure, right? Because the critical minerals need to be shipped in the U.S. I read they were also going to be shipped to UAE and to Europe. Infrastructure is needed, and the Lobito corridor, and that was also announced last year. We discussed that it was going to be one of like the routes, right? The Lobito corridor was going to be the route from the Congo all the way to Angola, and then shipped to the U.S. So the infrastructure here created is not like it's not random, and that these infrastructure again are built specifically for extraction. And Congo has lived that history, and I mentioned Henry Morton Stanley, and we're hearing a lot about the Lobito corridor as the development projects. But from your work globally, what should people be able to understand about corridors like this? Who controls the routes and who controls even the pricing?
Yeah, well, it's great to bring this issue of the corridor because it is. Um, I mean, we know infrastructures for mining. I mean, you need transport, you need energy, and unfortunately, in DRC, as for most of the continent, uh, these kind of infrastructures have been mostly directed to these corporations and extractions rather than to the people. And we see uh, in DRC and elsewhere on the continent, you see big dams producing hydroelectricity, but the power going to the mines. And the big priority for building the big dams is really the extraction. And for the corridor, it's it's a railway that was built under the colonial times, nearly
Hmm.
100 years ago. It is not being upgraded. There still be there's still no environmental social impact assessment that has been produced. There's still no discussion about the itinerary or the consequences of the impact. People are very concerned. Global Witness has put out a report uh, estimating that up to 6,000 people could be displaced, and there are many by the public works, and that there are a lot of concerns around the compensation for the loss of land. But it's interesting because this project is announced before any Trump says, "Oh, we're gonna do have these big railways, so we can export to the U.S." But there's no like public investigation into it, consultation of the people. All this has been completely sidelined, and decision has been taken, and there will be some social assessment later on that will, I guess, identify who is gonna suffer from it. So it's very typical to this kind of very colonial way of putting infrastructures for extractions, where it's not about the people, it's not about asking anyone for consent. It's really about doing what we need to do, which is having a road for this exports. And it's remarkable to see in the strategic agreement with the US to see percentages that have been defined for the three key minerals to be exported from through the corridor: copper, cobalt, and I blank on the last one. But there are percentages which require DRC to export these amounts of minerals to through the corridor for export to the US. So in terms of loss of sovereignty, you have before you can make any deal with anyone, you earmark a whole amount of the extracted minerals to be transferred through the corridor to the US. This should be another concern for those looking at this deal.
So what happened to local economies?
What happened
to local economies, like that we are doing all these, we're creating all these infrastructure structures, organizations, make sure that the minerals actually flow out of the Congo to the US. But my question is, because one of the argument is that at least the current regime says that, oh, that this so-called will create jobs. Not sure if there is even, you could probably speak on that, like if it's true, if it's actually if it's that data driven, that jobs will be created for Congolese people, right? And we know the Congo is one of the poorest country in the world. um, well, it is the richest country, but it has been really impoverished. We have the highest number of poor people in the country, which is insane. So my question to you is like, what do you think would happen to the local economies with such deals being implemented, the construction of infrastructures, and you talk about lands, people being displaced, but what happened to local economies under the framework?
The thing is, um, and I mean, all our listeners know that Congo has been mined for like over a century, and we know the situation of the basic human development indicators in terms of access to basic services, to infrastructures, to everything. So mining has been happening for so long with so little going to the people, which really should be a very high consensus for everyone looking at this deal. The I mean, extraction is not development, and the whole economic plan of exporting minerals doesn't really create jobs. So there are some discussions about how we should do some refinery, but there will be some jobs in construction. But this is not this is not a way to look at development by just selling your family jewelry. It is not about having a policy, having a strategic plan for the country where you decide how you're gonna develop. And I remember Tshisekedi mentioning the revenge of the agriculture over mining, and today we see this is completely lost and forgotten, as it's all about are we going to export to the US, and really in a deal that seems to be very favorable to the US and to Rwanda still, with very little that is being said or promised as economic returns for the people. And as I mentioned earlier, there could be there could be much more, looking at what kind of safeguards can be put in place. How do we ensure there will be decent returns for the country? We know that all the mining companies are specialists of tax evasion, specialists of maximizing their profits and revenues, and this is worldwide. This has been documented for decades. These companies are not there to do development. They are really there to extract and bring.
I think we lost Frédéric again. Trying to break down the local economies and what will happen to the people under the framework, I was really curious, and I think he's back, but we was really curious to know uh, if that was even going to create more jobs. And he said, I'm going to bring him back, that Chisekedi's promise was that agriculture was going to uh, be a priority over the mines, right? That was the key for development in the Congo. But fast forward now, he's backtracking and doing the opposite and actually prioritizing critical minerals. Frédéric Mousseau, yeah, keep going, please.
Yeah, no, I was saying simply, and against apologies for my bad connection, that mining
It's okay.
companies are clearly not good citizens. Mark Rubio said they are good citizens. They are there, and they have a whole history of devastating social and environmental impact, as
Mhm.
well as really maximizing the returns for the shareholders and making it as little as possible for the host countries and for the population. And there's a very big history, long history of that. It's interesting to look at some other African countries recently, such as Mali, who have been very aggressive as trying to get more from the mining companies, and it had to go into a very big arm twisting exercise to force some of the largest mining companies to give more of their income to the country.
Mhm.
And what Mali showed us was that it is possible that these companies initially say, "Oh no, we can't. We have so much investment and so high cost and blah blah blah." And when you have pressure from a government over these mining corporations, you can see that suddenly they accept to give away these hundreds or billions of dollars more than the hundreds of millions or billions that they were not ready to give earlier. And this really brings raises question for DRC, because in the current state of affairs with the US and this strategic partnership, is the government being going to be in a place that it can put really apply pressure on the corporations to get enough revenue and an adequate share, when we know the imbalance of power between DRC and the US, and the pressure that remains of Rwanda and the aggression that is there, for which DRC needs support. So it's like you export your minerals with a gun pointed to your head, and you have very little negotiation power or enforcement power towards the corporations who are going to be there and mine and export. So one big challenge for GRC certainly would be to find a way, and maybe the people can bring this to the government, is to find a way to put safeguards in place, to put commitments in place, so that these deals and this extraction is actually benefiting, and there's more than transparency. There's really a plan in place for the resources to benefit the people, and for safeguards to be in place, so that the rivers and the land is not ending polluted and devastated by all the mining operations, because this is another concern for many Congolese communities, is that we know mining is highly polluting industry, and
Yeah.
it's devastating on the long term, and the long term is hundreds of years. I live in California. We still can't eat the fish from California because of the gold rush that took place 150 years ago,
Mhm.
and people are not living as rural communities, getting the water from the river and so on. So it should be really a very serious concern for the Congolese to see these corporations coming in, and very little safeguards and protection in place for the people and the land and the water where they live.
Yeah, and Donald Trump announced early this week that $1 billion of investment, and to the company that you and I discussed a few months ago, talking about Orion, we're talking about Ivanhoe. a brief commentary, and I know I'm over time with what we agreed. If I can have a brief commentary about those mining companies that are actually going to be benefiting in billions in investment from the U.S. as announced by President Trump in the White House.
Yeah, definitely.
Can you hear me?
No, sorry, I could not hear you anymore.
I said if you can provide a brief commentary about Donald Trump announcing billions in investment that would go toward companies that you and I had discussed on this show, Orient, even how involved in those. I I would say maybe human rights violation or in endangering the wildlife and stuff like that. If you can provide like a brief commentary, and I know that we already over time, but I just want to have you say a brief commentary regarding that. Frédéric, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm very sorry. The connection is so bad, so I can't hear your questions
Ah,
anymore. So I'm very
it
sorry about that.
it it's okay. It's
Uh,
okay. Yeah, it's
yeah,
okay. Thank you so much for
yeah.
your clarity and
Hope,
for grounding this conversation. I appreciate, and I think that bring having you back and trying to explain the policy part, or at least the economy, or help us dive more, really helped the audience. But thank you.
Thank you so much. Apologies again, and again, if you didn't hear me well, or if I didn't answer all the questions, please check out our website, oaklandinstitute.org. There's a shafted, the Scramble for Critical Minerals in the DRC, which is our last report, and the blog I mentioned earlier about Paul Kagame and Maduro. So
Yes.
please check this out, and thank you so much, Gaëtan, for having me. With my apologies again.
No, thank you. It was my honor again. Thank you so much. I appreciate. Yeah. So, guys, he asked you to check out oaklandinstitute.org, and you will see the on the website the analysis, what they are saying regarding the Congo, what they are saying regarding even Rwanda, if Paul Kagame can be the next Maduro, which means that in the sense that he's gonna get kidnapped, but for a good reason this time, to actually be in trial for all the war crimes, crimes against humanity. And we have like numerous guests here speaking in length regarding the atrocities that the Rwandan backed militia and also the Rwandan government themselves have has committed. So now I really want to speak directly and clearly in terms of the agreements, right? That these agreements, like many people think, uh, particularly those in the Congo, they see that one as an aid or as a leverage for the Congo. And I think it's actually the opposite. That yes, it's not charity, but also it makes Congolese people and the Congo slave in terms of what now they owe to America, right? Because again, when Tshisekedi approached the White House, he was offering minerals in exchange for peace. Is the Congo peaceful today? Can you say that the millions of Congolese people who are displaced today, the people who died, the people who are orphans right now, the people that have lost their homes, can they say that they are in peace? Can they say that the country is at peace? We've heard news of the M23, Rwanda back M23 bombing civilian airports. And they are actually saying that they use they're actually saying that they use drones for the attack, because that's what terrorists do. They say, yes, we did this. That yes, the FRDC, the Congolese army, is not the only entity that has drones, that uses drones, but they use it to target a civilian facility. That's war crimes. That is a war crime. Use targeting civilian infrastructure. That is against international law. So the agreement really is not about peace. It's not about the safety of civilians. It is about the supply chain security. That the United States is restructuring its industrial future because they are fighting against China competition, and Frédéric that we had here also said that that could also be because of how the politics of the policies of Donald Trump. That also that could be potentially be an issue even for the EU, right? That we are talking about the US trying to restructure the energy transition, the defense technology, and Congo sits at the center of that equation because of what it has, because of the minerals. And that alone is not the problem. I think the problem is how this is being done. Because I mean, what's the purpose of having gold if you cannot sell it, right? Um, so the problem is really how this is being sold, how those minerals are even being extracted. At least 200 people died in the Rubaya mine, the largest coltan mine in the world. The Rubaya mine owned today by the M23 because it's under M23 or under Rwandan occupation. I think I need to use the correct terminology here. Rubaya, which is a Congolese territory, is today under Rwandan occupation. So Rwanda is occupying that mine, and somehow you have 200 people who die, including children. So even Rwanda, that is Rwanda via the M23, that is claiming to kind of bring liberation, to kind of bring the alternative to Tshisekedi, who is no saint in this, who is as corrupt as Kagame, who is somebody that should also face justice, in my humble opinion. But the M23, backed by Rwanda, is not offering anything better. Because we even have kids that still got killed. Because before the M23 occupying the mine, the Rubaya mine, it was Tshisekedi's brother, President Tshisekedi's brothers, that was owning or mining in that area. And before Tshisekedi's brother, it was a member of parliament that used to be the leader, and it really gets confusing, but hear me clearly. It used to be a leader of the CNDP, who rebranded itself as the M23. Mind blowing. So we have a cycle here of folks that join armed groups that get backed by Rwanda. They're able to create chaos, create war to fuel or sustain their economic barbarity, to sustain how they are making profits by exploiting mines, extracting minerals, exploiting the Congolese people. And I actually read an article on Al Jazeera last week, and it says, it was quoting a miner and says that the Congolese people, that we are tired of being exploited, talking about the minerals. We are tired of being exploited. So you have a man that used to be in the CNDP that is a Rwandan-backed militia. And then on the March 23rd, 2009, I believe, the CNDP changed and became, maybe it was after that, but March 23rd, and that's where the term M23 came from, because the folks said that accord, the agreement signed with the government on March 23rd, 2009 was not respected. Therefore, they're going to change their names and they're going to take weapons again and rebel against the Congolese government, the central government, and they call themselves M23. So a guy who later became a member of parliament, do not ask me if he was ever elected. I don't know. We know how elections happen in the Congo, because we saw in 2023 elections recently, a few years ago, with Tshisekedi's family members and friends and people from the same political party voting, having the voting machines at home, and we had videos. We discussed this on, maybe not on Congo Unfiltered because it didn't exist, but if you check our post on Instagram, we talked about this. The irregularities of those elections, that's under somebody who is claiming to be a Democrat, somebody who honors and respects democracy, though he was never elected in 2018. So I can just, I guess, make an educated guess about the 2018 elections, how that man who was part of an armed groups backed by Rwanda, accused because he was documented of war crimes, ended up becoming a member of parliament, not even prosecuted, right? But he became an MP. Somehow he did business and he was given the rights to exploit the Rubaya mine. So when Tshisekedi becomes president, he's trying to reshift things. He decided to take and cancel those rights of that person. That was, I think he's in prison. I believe last time I checked, he was in prison, accused of still having contact with the M23, which is really the irony here, because the dude literally was part of the CNDP. So the same way Tshisekedi decided that he was going to take by force all the mines or the rights, because Kone Nanga, I think it was the French magazine Le Monde, Kone Nanga, days or weeks after he pronounced that, he declared that Tshisekedi was a winner when he wasn't. And he said, Kone Nanga said that he was going to do mining. He was going to focus on business that he has. How did he even acquire those lands to be extracting gold? Again, a gift. For betraying the people. For putting in place somebody who never won. So that's the problem. It's how things are being done in the Congo. How those minerals are even being exploited, and by who? How did they even get to power? How the world is still allowing red carpets to be rolled, in front of someone who actually never won the elections. So you talked about the Joint Commission here. 5 Americans, 5 Congolese, consensus decision making. That here the export, right? The export corridors are prioritized over domestic processing. And that's why I asked the question, but you couldn't hear me, was what about jobs being created? How much would Congo make or gain if those minerals were also processed in the Congo? There's a difference. Do you know how much coltan cost versus an iPhone? The finished products will always cost more than the raw material. the material being extracted from the ground cost more than the refined material that will be sold. So Congo right here is at the bottom of the ladder. So these are not neutral technical choices. They are really power arrangement. They really want to make sure that it is one entity that stays on top. That is one entity or one party that is benefiting the most, and it's not the Congolese people. And what we discussed a couple weeks ago, and even the space for those who joined it was in French. And what was briefly discussed in this with Frédéric from Oakland Institute, that inside Congo, the agreement is being challenged before the Constitutional Court, not by foreign actors, by Congolese lawyers and civil society. Because here the argument is very simple, that sovereignty over natural resources cannot be symbolic. It is constitutional. And during the space with Jean-Marie Kalonji, who was a spokesperson of the collective of lawyers that that are challenging at the Supreme Court, the highest court of the country of the Congo. And toward the end, I was trying to get an update what's going on. Okay, you guys, presented the case at the Supreme Court. So what's happening? What's next? And he said something that I found very disturbing that I'm going to share with you. And he said to me that, to us, that the Constitutional Court wanted to notify the US Embassy. Okay. And they tried to notify the US Embassy 3 times. And 3 times the US Embassy refused. And the second part, because these are 2 reasons why right now things are stalling, is because the US refuses to be notified, and also because the president of the Constitutional Court is on vacation. So then I paused. I was like, wait, as Congolese citizen, you think that the accord that was signed in Washington is unconstitutional, that the President Tshisekedi should not have signed an accord that is clearly violating Article 9 of the Constitution, Article 12 of the Constitution, Article 214 of the Constitution, and I believe Article 215 and 17. They are arguing and they are saying that their fellow Congolese folks that happen to be in the government, that happen to be president, is violating the Congolese constitution. That yes, the US might be mentioned or is mentioned because it's a Washington Accord, but it's not up to the US to answer that question of whether or not the Congolese constitution is violated. It is up to the Congolese people, the Congolese government. So why stalling a whole process, judicial process, constitutional process, because they're trying to notify the US government? Why? And why do they have to do that not once, not twice, but 3 times? And 3 times the US refuses. And the third question, I've asked so many questions so far, is why the US refuses? Because the US understand that that's a delicate position. Because when in the Washington Accord, it says on the US strategic deals, it says clearly that the Congolese government will have to revise its tax laws because they are asking for 10 years break to American entities. It is also asking because they knew that the Congo will have to revise its constitution. Because under the constitution, you can't provide a VIP access to some people. You cannot tell someone, we're not going to accept your application to do business in the Congo when it comes to critical minerals because you're a Chinese national. That's discrimination. You cannot say that we're not going to accept, or we're accepting this person because merely they are Americans, because the other applicants were probably Congolese, probably French, probably Chinese, probably British. That here it's not, we're not going to provide the contracts to the entity or the person or the people or the companies that are offering more to the Congo and more to Congolese people. We are going to prioritize Congolese that are first and foremost Americans. That is unconstitutional. That you cannot have a joint commission where 5 Americans can decide whether or not 5 Americans, because it's a consensus. It's a consensus making decision. If all 10 folks don't agree, or if one of those 5 who are American disagree with what the Congo is proposing, is putting forward, nothing moves forward. Then you have foreign nationals, you have foreign individuals that have a direct say into strategic decisions of the Congo, to the strategic minerals of the Congo, that the Congo has to report back to the US ambassador. And right now, there is no US ambassador. The one that was there before got recalled. But that was also in the accord that they have to report back. Why does a sovereign country has to report back to anybody that is not even in the government? That is not even Congolese. Why? Can you imagine the American government having to report back to a different government, to, let's say, Israel, France, the UK, for anything? Can you imagine the outrage that that would have created? Can you imagine? So the other part that is also disturbing was to talk regarding the sanctions, right? And like I said, I was trying to explain that plainly, that um the sanctions here are not, they're not moral judgments, right? I do think that the countries still have that say. The Congo can decide to sanction like, and I think they did, right? They said that, hey, these part of the country right now are not occupied, are not ruled by us. They are under Rwandan occupation. So right now we're gonna put a moratorium. We're gonna put a ban on coltan coming from those areas. That's Congolese sovereignty to decide that no coltan will come out of the Congo from those regions. And if they do, we are going to sue countries that are buying minerals that come directly from those coltan, from those mines, from Rubaya, from, I don't know, other regions, Bunagana. That's the Congolese sovereignty. That's the sovereignty of the country to decide. It is just like Trump decided to impose tariffs to certain countries, right? And that's why it's important for countries to be independent. It's important for countries, for those who knows or who study economy or finances, to understand the power of the currency. You don't want to be slapped with sanctions on dollars. Make sure that your currency is strong enough to resist, just like the ruble has been, even after years of EU and American-led sanction. We saw the IMF published a couple years ago, and they said that the Russian economy was in a top 10 despite sanctions. And we've seen also with China, probably going to be hard, almost impossible to even sanction China in this regard, because China, beside the fact that millions of people live there and they can, obviously they make stuff, they can also buy stuff. They make stuff for American. A lot of things that we use here in the US come from China. But what makes countries like China and Russia like an economy that can resist sanctions? Because the real scandal here is not that sanctions are being discussed, is that for over 30 years, 3 decades, crimes in Congo were documented, verified, and ignored because the perpetrators were usually allies. And Oakland Institute said it. Can Paul Kagame be another Maduro? And we can also use a different country that is also involved in war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. But that's besides the point, because the point I'm trying to make here is that the justice delay for the Congo was not accidental, it was political. It was political. That a serving path does not mean isolation. It means transparency. There is a law in the book, Public Law 109-456, Section 105, that says that the US Secretary of State has the power to withhold aid to any country that is destabilizing the Congo. That has been written, signed into law by President Bush. And if there is a country that is involved, and we know that there is a country, at least one country involved, and that has been Rwanda, I am not opposed for sanction following the American law. Are we a country of law and order? I live in the US, or are we not? And if we claim that we're a country that follows the law, then nobody's above the law, even international law, because guess what? The headquarters of the UN is here in the US. The US is the architect, is one of the architects of what is known today as international law. Though it violates some, if not a lot, like just like any other powerful, right? All these countries that are permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, they have at least once violated international law. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to apply international at all. I'm in favor, and that's just me. I'm in favor of following the law. If the law says that you need to prosecute somebody who is involved in war crimes, crimes against humanity, why not? And we did, Friends of the Congo had a whole documentary, and go and look it up. Crisis in the Congo, Uncovering the Truth. And it was before, after that pressure that we led at that time. I was a college student at Portland Community College. When I first saw that video, I was moved at that time. I was a little bit sad because it was in English. I was like, I don't see the French version, but I was already speaking French. But I was moved to see that international. I was moved by that international solidarity of the Anglo-Saxon people, of the American people. 2013, today we're in 2026, and we still see that international solidarity. So a serving path does not mean isolation. It also means a parliamentary oversight. A true parliamentary oversight. We had Brother Niels here, attorney, and he also leading the Congolese diaspora desk, the Congo diaspora desk. And he said that you have on one end the Republican Party that in the Congress, right? Because they had a hearing talking about Congo merely from a economic standpoint. We need the minerals. We need to get those critical minerals. We need to stop China. And on the other end, you had the Democratic Party that are mostly talking about we need to help the civilians. We need to sanction Rwanda. The M23 needs to withdraw. But at the same time, both were blocking Congolese voices, which is interesting, right? Because last minute they canceled. I think they're gonna have another hearing soon, or maybe they already had. And this time, some like a Congolese person from a civil society will speak, and hopefully that will not be canceled at the last minute. But the point I'm trying to make is they might diverge into certain things, certain issues, but when you really go into the core of the issue, which is the Congolese sovereignty, is the voice of the people, both sides seems to be ignoring the voice of the people. Because what are these people really calling? That digger to Al Jazeera was saying, I am tired of being exploited. That's a cry for justice. What is being done to provide justice for Congolese people? That the annexed documents mentioned in the Washington Accord are deemed to be secrets. Why can't they release those annexed documents? What is being written in those documents, in those annexed documents, supplemental documents that are not worthy of public disclosure? We want transparency. Share that with the member of Congress. Share that with you, because you all need to know what's going on. Pressure your congressman and woman, your elected official. What is being said about the Congo? What was signed on my behalf in the Congo? As a taxpayer, what is being signed on my behalf? Because people now start understanding the policy or industrial policy here should go beyond extraction. It means cooperation, partnership that, yes, benefit the US. That should be the right of any country to draft partnerships or corporations that benefit the country, but not at the expense of human lives. That cooperation, that partnership should also strengthen the Congo, not manage it. How can we allow that? It's Black History Month, right? February in the US, acknowledging, recognizing the contribution of Black people, not forgetting the 200 plus years of slavery and how Black people were put at the back of the bus, ignored. How human rights of some people were ignored just because of the skin color. And we see the same thing when it comes to those cooperation and partnerships. That we have partnership signs signed with the EU, with European countries like Ukraine, is completely different from a partnership signed with the Congo, signed with African countries. Why do we prioritize lives in Europe more than lives in Africa? Congo is not poor. Congo is poorly managed. Poorly managed by the Congolese elite, poorly managed by those who right now holds all the cards of the global governance. Just like I would say, that Rwanda is poorly managed by the Rwandan elite. Whereas you feel to be a Rwandan citizen, seeing your country being thrown in the mud because your leader that you probably never elected, because that's his third, fourth terms, and being elected with 99%. Disregarding literally the law, international law. Ask about whether his troops are, and he says he doesn't know. Then later, weeks later, he's going to being sarcastic and almost it's insulting to watch him play the whole world. That he cannot be held accountable for something that he didn't know. He's saying that on record. But he knew exactly the question that was being asked to him. He knew. Then why did he keep lying?
So let me ask this directly, Mr. President. Today, on the 3rd of February, does Rwanda currently have any troops at all in Eastern DRC?
I don't know.
You're the commander-in-chief.
Yeah, there are many things I don't know.
What we need to do is just to implement what we signed. And what we signed is very clear. It has obligations for each side. And the security obligations we have is to neutralize the FDLR, which will allow for the lifting of Rwanda's defensive measures. So this is something that we should be doing. So the Congolese side cannot just say that talk about Rwandan troops or anything about Rwanda without talking about its part of the deal, which is to neutralize the FDLR that are supported by the DRC government, that are embedded in the DRC army. And this is something that they should be doing before talking about anything else.
Is Rwanda going to cease supporting M23 rebels?
Rwanda doesn't support the M23. Rwanda doesn't support the M23. Rwanda doesn't support the M23. The M23 is negotiating with the DRC government in Doha to find a solution to the problem they have. They have actually on 15th of December signed a framework agreement which will settle the problem they have, addressing the root causes, which include the marginalization and persecution of the Congolese Tutsi, the Congolese of Rwandan culture and language. So this is a separate issue that is being dealt with in Doha.
The UN says that the Rwandan army is in de facto control of M23 operations, including training their recruits under the supervision of Rwandan forces and supporting the rebels with high-tech Rwandan weaponry. Do you deny that?
This is what they say. They should actually focus on the support that the FDLR is getting from the DRC government. This is the main issue.
Do you deny this report by the UN?
We already denied it, madam.
President Trump says that everybody is going to make a lot of money. What is in it for Rwanda?
Oh, it's an important agreement. The Regional Economic Integration Framework that we signed today provide economic opportunities for both DRC and Rwanda, also with the support of the UN.
So, since the creation of M23, the Rwandan government, Paul Kagame, and I show the man who has me blocked on his Instagram. I didn't do anything to him, by the way, but that's okay. The Rwandan Minister of Foreign Affairs. Lie. One doesn't know what the Rwandan troops are as the commander-in-chief. The other says that the Rwanda does not support the M23. So that later, at the hearing a few weeks ago, the government will have a different stance, admitting that they are providing, in fact, support to the M23. But for the whole decade, since the creation of M23, we were gaslit. Friends of the Congo was gaslit. Probably you watching this, you were gaslit. That you were crazy. That you shouldn't listen to what Human Rights Watch is saying, that they are not credible. You shouldn't read documents or reports of Global Witness. They are not credible. You shouldn't read document of the United Nations group of experts. The mapping reports that literally maps out location, precise location of where atrocities were committed. Atrocity committed by multiple actors, including the Rwandan Defense Force. But they told us not to read or believe what we saw, what we heard, what we read. For a decade, we were gaslit. So what is the place of justice now that they are joining us and saying that, yeah, you're right. Yeah, we did it. Now they're on the records, because that position, that statement from the Rwanda ambassador was sent directly to the US Congress as a submission to what their positions are. What's the Rwandan official position on the M23? Now that on the records, they are saying, yes, we support M23 involved in war crimes, crimes against humanity, enrollment of children, soldiers. Can we now talk about implementing Public Law 109456, Section 105? That says, and I'm going to say that again, the U.S. Secretary of State has the power to withhold aid to any country that is destabilizing the Congo. And we have Frédéric talk about the biggest absent of this new, very first summit on critical minerals, the Critical Minerals Ministerial. Because Paul Kagame has been selling to the whole world that they produce coltan, enough to be selling to other countries in the quantities that have been selling. We have been saying at Friends of the Congo that these are Congolese resources stolen and being sold illegally. We have been saying it based on credible evidence and documentation from credible sources, including the United States government. And for those who are skeptical about the US government, I understand your skepticism. Happy Black History Month to missing number 366. So can we now implement that? Because if you don't believe he was skeptical on what the US government is saying, and I understand that, well, what about the Human Rights Watch? What about Amnesty International? We received, Friends of the Congo, I had the honor to receive the director for Africa here on Congo Unfiltered talk about the M23. What about Amnesty International? What about Global Witness? What about Impact? What about the United Nations? So are we all wrong? No, we're not all wrong. We cannot be all wrong about what's going on in the Congo. We cannot be all wrong when it comes to the issue of the Congo. Just like we cannot be wrong when on Congo Unfiltered we have been saying openly that Congo is made vulnerable by deals negotiated quietly abroad and without its people. And Congo Unfiltered, Friends of the Congo, we exist because we believe that the future of the Congo, the future of any country, whether it is in sub-Saharan Africa, in North Africa, in West Africa, in East Africa, in South Africa, any country in the global South cannot be negotiated in silence. And until then, we will continue to amplify voices that join us in the fight for justice and sovereignty of the Congo. I will see you next week. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, to follow us on Instagram, on X, on Facebook. Go to our website, freecongo.org, and see how you can get plugged in and connected and how you can be involved. So happy to have participated today. this morning in the first Friends of the Congo, at least for the year, onboarding for our interns, because we do have internship programs where we kind of like help, bring together young minds, high schoolers, college students, and people that can help in that fight. So there are ways for you to definitely help, whether it is donating if you can, whether it is helping as a volunteer, joining the movement, because Congo will be liberated by Congolese people and by friends of the Congo who believes in human rights. Saying thank you so much, y'all. I will see you next Saturday.